Hello, everyone. I'm Robert. Welcome to Skeptic Philosophy. We've heard a lot of different arguments for the existence of a God, be that the cosmological Kalam argument, be that a teleological argument, or a whole array of different arguments, from the ontological and so forth. I'm interested in some arguments that make a position against a God or the characteristics that are commonly being defined as a God as being able to exist. And this is not the same as a rebuttal to some of these arguments that are commonly made for. So this is not a rebuttal of the pro position. Rather, this is a pro position of that thing cannot be arguments. There's one that seems very clear to me that seems to stand out, and I wanted to discuss it while it was on my mind today. There's this idea that consciousness or even the soul seems to be represented in many arguments as a singularity, as an indivisible thing, that it can't be broken down more. But we know that individual thoughts, individual memories, individual core ideas, that they are constructed in the aggregate of our life, whether these are relationship problems with our parents or whether these are these singular kind of core memories that we cannot dispose of, or even inside of religious contexts when we had this come to Jesus moment that was very impactful and important, or these commitments and relationships that we've made. All of these things seem to be compartmental, that they can be broken down. So when we look at things like whether there is a consciousness or a soul, these things surely are divisible into their individual parts. So the ideal of us go into some heaven, whether we're stripped of the physical body that we have or not, whatever ideal that we have of a soul that is divisible from the physical, that soul still has to have individual component parts inside of the consciousness or inside of the characteristics of that soul. Otherwise, all of the souls are simply the same thing. They're just all exactly the same. What gives it individual characteristics, though, is the individual experiences of life that has created it. And if you look at these things as components that have made what the person is, then can these components be created by God? Can the individual components of this consciousness or of this soul state, are they something that God can simply create whole cloth, that they don't have to go through an experiential reality? And the problem is, if you say that no, that they can't be created by God, then we have an issue here. Because if God can create all things and has created all complexity, surely the individual components or characteristics of the soul can be created by this all-powerful creator God. And if he can create the individual components that creates the soul of who we are, or the consciousness, if you want to go that direction, of who we are, then why could God not just create the finished product right out the gate? Why have to create a universe at all? Why have to create a world that kind of shapes these things and creates these things systemically through a filtration system of reality? There's a theory called, I believe it's called Last Thursday, that everything that is simply was created last Thursday. It's more of a semantic argument. It's more of a semantic kind of proposition that all of reality could have been created last Thursday, preloaded with all the memories of all of the past that aren't real. They're all fictional. They're all simply created there, boom, all at one time. And even inside of this context, we can ask the question, can a creator God create this universe in this way that everything appears or feels like it's been around forever? But in truth, it all just happened. It all just started last Thursday. And when we think about the individual souls, the ideal that God wants a finished product to be with him for eternity in this space that we call heaven, However we imagine this, and there are different sects that seem to do this, they say that this place is a metaphysical place and that we don't have physical bodies. And then there are those that argue that there are still these physical bodies, but they're a renewed type of physical body that is not a corruptible body or it doesn't come to an end. Either way we define this, we have no problem looking at it through the lens of this kind of philosophy. If God can make it as a finished product, why allow it to be made through a systemic process? Is it not far less complicated to simply make it as a finished product? And there are 1,000 reasons why this is a better way to do it. Firstly, it's a better way to do it because we wouldn't have all of the wasted product that winds up being punished in hell forever. If you believe in hell, if you don't, we can throw that one out. But either way, you have an abundant amount of suffering that is created inside of that context that is all for nothing. If God could simply create the souls that he wants as a final product, finished, to reach the final state. So there's no reason to create all of the wasted material of the universe, all of these lifeless planets, lifeless galaxies. All of this is not a necessity to start with. And when we look at things that are like as complex as DNA and how DNA builds a massive network of complexity to reach some conscious state simply for reality to shape further the conscious memories, this is a far more complex way of getting to an outcome that God could simply create with all of the individual components of that consciousness or the soul fully finished in that state. And no one has to suffer. All of the ones that aren't going to make it to heaven, they don't have to exist at all. There's none of this infinite amount of wasted material where what we get is we get like a 99.9% of wasted material in the universe just to reach some small finality of an elect group that's going to come with God. Just create the elect group holistically. And even worse than this is if we don't believe that this is going to happen inside of a physical space, but that we are going to be renewed in some spiritual and metaphysical sense, the entirety of physicality itself did not need to be created. There's no reason to even make a universe. Why not just make this metaphysical thing in its finished state? It doesn't make any sense. This is not something that computes at any logical level. And to try to get around this enormous problem by saying, well, God works in mysterious ways, it doesn't solve in any way the problem, and it doesn't even begin to try to patch together an explanation for this. It seems far more likely that the systemic system that created us is a continuation of whatever physical laws were there, that there's no person with a plan to start with. There's no person with a planned outcome. Seems a far more likely thing that a person with a planned outcome and infinite power doing the most complicated methodology of guiding the natural system to get to a final outcome when he could have just started at the finish line, so to speak. Why run the gauntlet that you have had to create, and the gauntlet itself wasn't necessary? You could just create the final outcome. It is an infinite amount of waste of time, space, and an infinite creation of unnecessary suffering.